I'm so honored and excited to be here. As Alex mentioned, I finished the CRP program about 3.5 years ago and went to many a city forum in that time and found them all to be super thought-provoking and inspiring. So I'm really excited to be here talking with y'all. Here's a little rundown of what I would like to spend the hour talking with you about. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Saigebrook and O-SDA and myself. I'm going to try to convince you that housing tax credits really matter and kind of walk you through our process of scoring and competing for sites in Texas's 9% housing tax credit round. And then I'll give you an overview of the public input opportunities within housing tax credit projects in Texas, and then hopefully really summarize all of that and make it super clear by going through a couple of case studies of real projects that I've worked on here in Texas and kind of putting those lessons into practice. So as Alex mentioned, Saigebrook Development and O-SDA Industries are both woman-owned, really small, affordable housing developers in Texas. Saigebrook is based in Weatherford near Fort Worth, and then O-SDA is here in Austin. And they're two separate firms, but they really act as one because they partner on all of their development projects. So one will act as the developer and the other will act as a consultant. But really all of us on the team touch every project that either firm works on. I've been there for a little over 3 years as a project manager. I was really lucky to find my way into that job right out of CRP. But actually 2 weeks from today is going to be my last day with Saigebrook and O-SDA. I'm transitioning into community outreach and land use consulting. But everything that I'm going to go over today is really based in my time with Saigebrook and O-SDA and looking at projects that we've built there. On the left is the Azalea. It's very close to here. It's a mixed income apartment project right near Mueller off of 35, just northeast of here. And that project is a really good example of kind of the type of housing that we build. So usually 2 to 5 story, 50 to 200 unit mixed income affordable housing, usually financed through housing tax credits, which I will tell you all about. I want you to believe that housing tax credits are really important and matter in our process, regardless of whether or not you think that they're the most efficient means of financing affordable housing. We have to think about them because they are far and away the most important tool that we currently have for creating affordable rental units in the United States. Of the rental units that have been created since 1986, the vast majority of them have been financed using housing tax credits. And all it is a financing system that is created at the federal level that allows developers to build affordable housing. So it was created through the Tax Reform Act of 1986 under the Reagan administration, and it creates a public-private partnership which allows developers to acquire, rehab, and develop new rental housing for low-income households and individuals. And the full name is actually the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit, but that income is based on the county-wide income. And based on the way that we've seen certain counties have their median family income rise so much in the last few years, I don't necessarily think that low income is a super useful term to describe the people that are living in housing tax credit properties anymore. Travis County has seen their MFI now rise to $110,000 a year for a family of 4. So the housing that I'm building in Travis County can be serving families that are making $60,000 to $80,000 a year. I wouldn't necessarily consider those people to be low income. A lot of them are dual earner households. They're mostly gainfully employed. They just can't find housing within the market that we have in Travis County. So tax credits are created at the federal level, and then they're allocated at some sub-federal level. Usually that's the state level. In Texas, it's the state level. And something that I think is also important to point out about housing tax credits is that there's no actual federal expenditure of money. It's rather a tax break that's being created and given as an incentive to equity investors in affordable projects. And that is like as deep as I will go into the financing structure of affordable tax credit projects right now. But I think that's important to know because There is no, as some would say, government handout associated with this, and because of that, they're very politically resilient. So these tax credits are a program that's been in place since 1986 through every administration, and that's another reason that I think they're important and we have to pay attention to them. So in Texas, we have a state-level process by which we allocate these federal tax credits or tax breaks. And it's super competitive, and it's regulated by something called the QAP, or Qualified Allocation Plan. So every year, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs, or TDHCA, puts out this Qualified Allocation Plan, or QAP, that basically sets up the rules of the game that year for winning these competitive 9% tax credits. And the game of winning these tax credits is all based on a point system. So as a developer competing for tax credits, you are trying to get as many points as you can to outscore other developments. And you really need every point you can get. So as I kind of go through what our scoring process is, you can see how easy it is for a development to no longer be feasible because it misses just a few points in that scoring system. So every year the QAP is different, but generally over the past few years, there have been some themes in what the QAP prioritizes in terms of which developments they want to give points to and thus fund with housing tax credits. So generally they're looking for projects that are in areas that are underserved by housing tax credit projects already. So census tracts that have not had a housing tax credit project built in them for the last 20 years, and even better if all the surrounding census tracts also don't have affordable tax credit housing built in them. It's also prioritizing projects built in high opportunity areas, which is defined by high income and low poverty rate in those areas. Or if you're not in a high opportunity area, you can be in what's called a concerted revitalization plan. That can be a neighborhood plan or a combined neighborhood plan, or a TERS or a planned district that at some point has called for more housing, more affordable housing, or even just more new development. In the planning process, TDHCA will generally consider that to be a concerted revitalization plan, and you can get points for being within that area. And then finally, TDHCA and the QAP prioritize projects that are close to a lot of jobs. And in the last few years, they've kind of been rethinking this because a lot of our jobs have become remote, that maybe it's not quite as important for affordable housing to be located super near these dense job centers. In addition to all of this site selection criteria, developers have to meet a ton of other criteria to be eligible even to compete and receive tax credits. You have to have a lot of experience, and you have to have a lot of access to this whole complicated network of professions that has sprung up around this process, specific tax credit accountants and attorneys and underwriters who you need to be on your team working on your project with you. So there's a very high threshold to even compete in this process. I'm going to give you an example of how competitive the tax credit process was this last year. So these are all of the projects that submitted tax credit applications, pre-applications, in January of 2022 in Region 7, which includes Travis and Williamson County in Austin. There are 12 projects that submitted pre-applications in January. And you can see down here, this is the total tax credit request from all those 12 projects. And then on the far side, that's the amount available in tax credits to allocate to projects in Region 7. So you can already see that the math isn't going to work out well for most of these projects. These are the 5 projects that went on to submit full applications this year in Region 7. And there are a lot of reasons that a project might submit a pre-application and then not go on to submit a full application. But generally, you would do that if you think, based on the pre-application list that's come out, that your project isn't going to score well and isn't going to be competitive for tax credits. Because to get to this full application point, it's normal for developers to have spent about $60,000. And you've done a lot of work up to that point, including getting architectural and engineering plans, having a site under contract, having your financing structure set up, including having met with your debt and equity provider and having letters of interest from them. So as soon as you realize that you're not going to win tax credits, you want to stop spending money and working on that project as fast as you can, because you've got other projects to work on. It's not a good use of your time or money. So only 5 projects went on to submit full applications in Region 7 because they thought they were competitive. And this is the project that was funded ultimately. Only one from that original list of 12. It's called Katy Lofts. It's a project that I worked on and I'll tell you a little bit more about. But you can see that it's an extremely competitive process and there's a huge narrowing down of which projects get funded. It's not normal for only one project to get funded in a region. There were kind of some extenuating circumstances this year in Austin, but in general, it's very few compared to how many submit pre-applications or full applications. So with the fact that it is a very competitive process in mind, we set about every year looking for sites on which to build this affordable housing that we think will score within Texas's housing tax credit system. And I mentioned that the first criteria that the QAP focuses on is being in an underserved area, in a census tract that has not had affordable housing tax credit housing built in it in the past 20 years. So this is a map of all of Austin's housing tax credit projects from 1997 to 2020. So we're missing 2 years of data in here. But in general, can you see a pattern? It's kind of a theme. Most of that affordable housing is built in East Austin. There is not a lot west of I-35. There is definitely not a lot west of Mopac. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. Obviously, the historic racist and systematic disinvestment in East Austin has made that land, until very recently, a lot more affordable and available to developers to build on. But I'm going to kind of take you through the site scoring process and show you some other reasons that this dispersion has happened the way that it has. So we'll layer census tracts on top of our map. And what we're looking for, what I'm looking for when I'm looking for a site on which to build housing tax credit housing, is a census tract that has none of these orange triangles in it, which represent existing projects, and even better, one that has none in any of the census tracts abutting it. So we call that a clean tract, and if it doesn't have any in the surrounding tracts, we call that clean all the way around. And so we're looking for a tract that's clean or clean all the way around to get maximum points for underserved, for our underserved category in the QAP. So just as an example, let's look at tract 3.02 up here. It's near us. It's this rectangular tract kind of in north central Austin. Can everyone see what I'm talking about? 3.02. Okay, so it's clean. It's not clean all the way around, but I really like the location. I think it's central. I like that it's west of I-35. And I'm going to, for the purposes of this exercise, decide that I want to build in tract 3.02. So I'm going to look for sites that are for sale within that tract. But we also have to consider opportunity, because that's also a scoring criteria for the QAP. So this map is showing us area median income relative to county area median income. And if I'm looking for a site that will score well in opportunity points, I can pretty much choose any of the sites that are not white, anything purple and very purple on this map. So I can see that my tract 3.02 is purple, and I think it's going to be high opportunity. So I'm going to continue moving forward with that tract. I still think it's going to score well based on the system. I also mentioned that the QAP prioritizes proximity to jobs. So this is a job heat map of Austin. I'm sorry that it does not lay on my other maps as nicely as I wanted it to. But what we're looking for when we're looking for proximity jobs, at least this last year, was at least 16,500 jobs within a 2 square mile radius of our site. That's what we need to get our full job points, and we need every point we can get. In this case, this map is showing a mile radius, so really anywhere that is in one of those purple job centers or nearby it, I think is going to score well. And if you can still find my tract 3.02, it's very close to a dense job center in North Austin. What is that job center? It's UT. There's a lot, but the one that I'm looking at near 3.02 is UT. So I still think that that is going to be a great scoring tract, and spoiler alert, it is a great scoring tract. That's the tract that Katie Lofts is in, which was the only project that was awarded housing tax credits this year. So I have my site that's in an underserved area, in a high opportunity area, and near a large job. So I'm good, I'm gonna get my tax credits, I'm ready to go build. Not quite, because I need to make sure that I'm scoring all of my possible points, and that includes public input points. And so the QAP provides 4 main opportunities for public input in Texas within this system: the state representative letter of support, a city resolution of support, nonprofit letters of support, or neighborhood support. And I'll explain each of those to you. So when we have a site that we're excited about submitting for housing tax credits, we need to go to the state house representative and ask for a letter of support for that specific project. They can write a letter of support, opposition, or neutrality, or they can choose to not write a letter at all, which is a new development, in which case their points will go to the city to give out to us as a project if they choose to. If I think that a state rep is not going to write me a letter of support, then I'm going to try to convince them not to write a letter at all. Because even if they write a neutral letter, I don't have the points I need to be competitive, and the project can't move forward. So a state rep has a lot of power in this process to support or oppose a project. And they really listen to their constituents, who often write them letters asking them to support or oppose a project. There are some state reps who support every project that comes across their desk. There are some state reps who oppose every project that comes across their desk, and there is no tax credit housing in those districts. This is a piece of the QAP that a lot of developers have been working to get removed for some time, because it is a lot of power for one person to have over affordable housing in their district. There's also a lot of state reps who like this because it gives them the opportunity to support affordable housing. Our next piece of public input that we're looking for is a city resolution of support. So we need the city council in the city that we're building to pass a resolution supporting our specific project. And each city has their own criteria for which projects they will support within the city. So on top of all of my location factors, I also need to meet the specific city criteria for where they want affordable housing built. So in Austin, for example, the city looks for projects that are close to Imagine Austin or mobility bond corridors, that are close to transit, and that are within a concerted revitalization plan. And then they like projects that are in a high opportunity or a gentrifying area, as defined by the Uprooted report, which I worked on, is whether or not they give of support to a project. They also get a lot of feedback from neighbors. So listen to that feedback. In Austin, in this past year, they also really chose to prioritize permanent supportive housing projects, which are projects for people exiting homelessness that offer the deepest levels of affordability. So they were only willing to write letters of support for that specific kind of housing tax credit project in this past year. I think they will do it again in the coming year. Next, we have our nonprofit letters of support, which we only need, this is a crazy system, we only need if the neighborhood in which we are trying to build is not registered with the Texas Secretary of State as a neighborhood association. So if the neighborhood is not registered, those points go to nonprofits, and we reach out to local nonprofits to ask for letters of support for our specific project. This is pretty straightforward. Generally, local nonprofits understand the need for affordable housing and are happy to write us letters. Once we have sort of established a relationship within a community, we can go back to the same nonprofit year after year, and they tend to support our projects. Finally, we have neighborhood support. So if the neighborhood association in which we're building is registered with the Texas Secretary of State, they have the opportunity to submit a packet of support or opposition for the project. Again, if they submit a packet of opposition, our project's dead. We won't move forward any further because we won't be competitive. However, many neighborhoods are not registered with the Texas Secretary of State, but they also have a lot of opportunities for input throughout the whole system that I'm describing. The most important one, I think, is that if a site needs rezoning, the neighborhoods have the opportunity to support or oppose that zoning. In Austin, we have a tool called Affordability Unlocked that was put in place to try to greatly limit the number of rezonings that have to happen for affordable housing to be built. However, it is a multiplier. It's not a new base zoning if you're creating affordable housing. So if it's a single-family zoned lot, we still don't necessarily have the entitlements that we need to build multifamily affordable on that lot. In a lot of cases, we still have to go through a rezone. If you've looked at an Austin zoning map recently, you know that a ton of Austin is zoned single family, and that takes a lot of lots out of play for what Affordability Unlocked is set up to do. In other cities, we don't have Affordability Unlocked. We more often have to go through a zoning process. Ideally, I'm looking for a site that's already zoned multifamily and that meets all my location criteria. But especially somewhere like Austin, there are a lot of other people that are looking for multifamily zoned sites to build on. It's hugely competitive. Usually I don't find this perfect, big enough multifamily site in an underserved area with jobs in a high opportunity neighborhood. So I very often have to go through a rezoning process. And neighborhoods have a lot of sway in that process. They also have a lot of sway in the previous two public input opportunities. They can write letters to their state representative and encourage them to support or oppose the project. And they can write letters to and show up at city council and encourage them to support or oppose the project. So even if a neighborhood isn't registered with the state, they still have a lot of opportunities to be involved in the projects that we are trying to build. I want to pause because that was a ton of information about housing tax credits. You're all ready to compete in the 2023 QAP cycle. But before I get into the case studies, does anyone have any questions at this point? Yeah.
Welcome back. It's so nice to see you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm wondering if you could say a little bit, I know you don't want to get too much into the weeds, but do the tax credits, they go to the investors, you said, so the equity partners in the project, and then when do they claim them? Like, what is the time lag? So I'm imagining they file their tax returns and they claim this credit, but presumably the tax credit is awarded in a certain year, and then it's, you know, they're using it in a later year?
Yep, they are getting it paid out over a 10-year period from closing. So that tax credit amount that I was showing on, this might have been a mistake. These housing tax credits that are requested, that is a tax credit per year for the equity investor over a 10-year period.
I see. Okay.
Does that answer your question?
And what does the 9% refer to?
Sorry, I should have defined that at the beginning. So there's two general categories of tax credits, 4% and 9% tax credits. 4% tax credits are a little more, I think Jake said this the first time, over the counter. If you meet the needed criteria, you can just get them. That is less the case in the last few years. They've become a little bit more competitive. But 9% tax credits are the ones that are super competitive because they lead to a lot more financing for your project. And those are the ones that we generally deal in the companies that I work with, and the ones that there is this whole competitive system set up around. Is that answer? Yes.
I'm curious about the $60,000 you said that goes into just like preparing the initial letter. Is that
That's per project.
per 60,000 per project, and then I guess I'm wondering, like, what are the costs to put all those together? Is that mostly staffing, or is it like, do you have to kind of hire out other people to do certain aspects of it? I'm just curious where the costs come from.
Yeah, it's a good question. It depends on your firm. So if you have an in-house architect and engineer, then that's just staffing. We are really small and we hire out every piece of that. So that money is coming from our time to work on the project, and as you'll see, a lot of time spent engaging with the neighborhood, and then paying our architect and our engineer and our accountant and our market researcher to put together what's needed for the full application, and our tax credit consultants who specialize in putting together the applications correctly.
And then how much is it after the initial to submit the full? I think you did 5 after that. How much is it for each of those 5?
So 60,000 is to get you to full application.
Okay.
The barrier to a pre-application is not as high. You don't need to have all those pieces in place. You're sort of just announcing your intent to submit a full application, which helps us all to say, if I'm not going to get funded, I know these other projects are in the running, so I'm not going to submit a full application. Does that make sense?
My understanding was 60,000 just to get that, and then you're looking at however much more to do the rest of it.
I mean,
At
it's,
least a little bit.
yeah, it's a lot of money. Yeah, yeah.
If you want to rezone, and last part, how difficult is it to get rezoned?
It depends.
Neighborhood, more or less.
Very difficult. It depends on the city and the case and what the base zoning is that you're trying to change and what kind of neighborhood fight is had. It's very difficult, but it's really case and city dependent. And there are cities that we won't even try in because we don't think it's going to happen. Any other questions before? Yes.
I had a quick one. So is it the case that the points get tallied up and then it gets reviewed at the state level, and it's just the ones that have the highest number of points go forward?
Yep.
Or is there more qualitative assessment of the proposals? And
It's-
then, so you have to position them in a certain way?
Yes.
So that folks are reading between various lines, or?
It's really all point-based, but the point system is like this 10-dimensional game of chess that is so complicated because there are tiebreaker components, and in addition to your location scoring and your community input scoring, there are all kinds of minutia involved in that system. And you can be awarded your tax credits and still need to make certain other pieces fall into place before they are insured, like having your zoning in place. Any other questions? Yes.
Just a quick question. Could you, I was intrigued by the role of neighborhood associations here, and particularly this idea that registered neighborhood associations with the Secretary of State have, privileged position. Are you aware of that registration being, significant for other parts of the process or otherwise?
I don't know of another reason to be registered. I'm sure there are other reasons to be registered other than to weigh in on this process. I don't think it's difficult to be registered. I just don't think most neighborhoods need it most of the time. The city sees them as a valid neighborhood association. They can weigh in on city issues. This is kind of the only reason that I know that neighborhoods would need to be registered. And a lot of neighborhoods find this information out after we've already submitted our pre-application, at which point they have to wait until the following year to submit a packet because they can't register in the middle of the process. They can register, but they can't weigh in. Does that make sense? All right, ready for some case studies? So the first project that I'm going to talk about is called Azalea West. It's a project that I worked on in 2020 in Fort Worth. It was proposed to be 80 units, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. So we're really targeting families with this one, with these larger units. And I've just given you a breakdown of what the rents would be approximately within this property. So these very lowest rents targeting households making at or below 30% of area median income in Tarrant County, which is where Fort Worth is. And these are based on the 2020 area median income. So these are what the rents would have been at the time. So a 1-bedroom in that lowest income bracket would rent for $380 a month, and a 3-bedroom would rent for $530 a month. So that's pretty deeply affordable units. And then it gets slightly less affordable as we move up the income brackets, and we have 12 units at market rate in this project. And when we build mixed income housing, these market rate units are dispersed throughout the property. They're indistinguishable from our affordable units. Sometimes we switch out the backsplash color just so we don't get bored as we're planning them, and that's not true. They have stainless appliances, and our affordable units have black appliances. Those are the differences. But also because they're in these affordable communities, they tend to go for closer to what an 80% area median income household could pay than true market rate. But for our purposes, this is the kind of mixed income housing that we're building. Azalea West was in the best location that we've ever had the opportunity to build affordable housing. There was tons of transit. There was a 2-minute walk to a giant park. There was a lot of nearby retail with this Foundry District. This is West Fort Worth. There was a Target across the street. There were a lot of grocery options nearby, all within a very walkable area. This is the Linwood neighborhood. It's really up and coming. It's a really cool part of Fort Worth. This census tract was underserved. It was clean all the way around. There were a lot of jobs in the area, so we got full job points, and it was a high opportunity area. This was the #1 scoring site in that region in 2020. I made this map of all the nearby parks for the neighborhood because there was a lot of concern about a lack of green space on site. So a lot of great amenities near this site. It was a killer site. So we know it's going to score well from a location perspective, and we start going through our public input process. We got our state representative letter of support, check. We got our city resolution of support from Fort Worth City Council, check. The neighborhood was not registered with the Texas Secretary of State, so we went to our local nonprofits that we've worked with in the past, and they wrote us letters of support, check. But the site needed to be rezoned. So the neighborhood was not registered, so they weren't able to oppose us through a packet that they would submit to TDHCA, but they did have the opportunity to support or oppose us through the zoning process. So it was actually made up of 5 lots, and they were zoned urban residential and mixed use, and we were trying to rezone all 5 to a PD mixed use zoning because the mixed use zoning didn't give us quite the density that we were hoping to have on those 5 sites for 80 units. It was a 4-story building that we were planning. And there's no affordability unlocked in Fort Worth, so we didn't have any sort of shortcut through that process as we might have in Austin. So we started meeting with the neighborhood. I am an American Airlines Gold status customer because of how many times I flew up to Fort Worth during this zoning process. We started meeting with them in December before we even submitted our pre-application. And then around March of 2020, all those meetings started to become virtual, but we continued to have a lot of Zoom meetings with the neighborhood, a lot of meetings over the design and specifics of the project. I think it's important to point out in this case, but also the research bears this out in general across the United States, that generally with these neighborhood meetings, there are usually like 6 to 10 key people that show up at every single meeting. And sometimes there's a few more and sometimes there's a few less, but generally there's this core contingency of neighborhood advocates who show up, and those are the people that kind of disperse the information from us to the rest of the neighborhood through listservs and Nextdoor. And in this case, and again, we know this to be true generally, those people tend to be older, wealthier, whiter, and more likely to be homeowners than the neighborhood as a whole that they represent. So in the case of Azalea West, we went up there over and over again. We met in different locations. We knocked doors on local businesses. We really tried to engage everyone in the neighborhood, but we ended up seeing the same faces over and over again at these meetings who are sort of the key players in the neighborhood. I tried to summarize some of their zoning concerns in a way that made sense. I recognize this is kind of an insane slide, but I think it's useful because if you've ever been to a planning commission meeting, you've probably seen or heard a lot of this anywhere, not just in this specific case or in Fort Worth. So the main concerns are around having a lot of new residents in the neighborhood, and that leading to, in this case, a nearby park, but more generally nearby amenities being overrun with people, having more cars in the neighborhood, and that leading to more traffic and more street parking. And in this case, there was a lot of concern about that street parking blocking fire access to the neighborhood. Concerns around the building design and the structure. So too much lap siding and not enough masonry is something that we hear a lot. Concerns that the increased impervious cover would lead to flooding and environmental issues. Generally, that there was not enough green space for children to play, which would lead them to have to play in the street, which would lead them to be hit by cars. This came up in every neighborhood meeting, in every planning commission meeting, in every city council meeting. There was a strong concern that children were going to be struck by vehicles if this housing was built. And then the opportunity cost, sort of this concern that this neighborhood and a lot of neighborhoods have. What would be here were it not for this affordable housing? And what could be built that would send my neighborhood in the trajectory that I want it to go and develop in the way that I hope it develops if it were not for these 80 units of affordable apartments. In this case, the neighborhood was excited about the opportunity to have luxury retail there in lieu of these apartments. But you know, people want grocery stores and commercial uses, coffee shops. Really, people have very specific ideas about what they'd like to see in their neighborhood that's not this. And then that the building is not the right density for the area, that it's too high and it will loom. Again, this is a 4-story building. There's a 5-story apartment building across the street. But all of this leading to a decline in property values. If this were Austin, it might be more a concern that it's leading to an increase in property taxes. But either way, something's going to happen to my property that I am not on board with if this housing is built. And I think it's valid to want development occurring near you to be great. And I think that being informed about what's happening near you is really important, and you should have your questions answered thoroughly by a developer that's coming to work in your neighborhood. But we can also see that some of these concerns are based in misinformation and are provably false, like crime and a decline in property values. And all we can do in those cases is try to educate neighborhoods as we go through this process and hopefully introduce them to, if not the people that would be living there, the idea of the people that would be living there as being not characters that are going to bring crime and decay to the neighborhood. So what happened in the case of Azalea West? The planning and zoning staff recommended a rezone to allow for this project. In the meantime, the neighborhood submitted a valid petition, meaning that landowners in more than 20% of the, owning more than 20% of the surrounding 200-foot buffer around the site were opposed to the rezone. So we needed a supermajority vote from council to pass this rezone. And we had our COVID, both in-person and virtual council meeting in May of 2020. We got 6 of the votes that we needed. As we were kind of giving our closing arguments for why the rezone should happen, the mayor's camera went out. And after we had finished speaking, she came back and said that there had been a technical issue, and as a result, she had to abstain from the vote. And so we got only 6 of the 9 votes we needed. We didn't have the needed zoning, so we couldn't get our tax credits, and the project dies. So this is the death of affordable housing from my dramatic title. It's a lot of time and money and heartache to put into, again, the best site we could have built on to not have it proceed. There's townhomes going in there now. So this is my second case study. This one took place in Austin. It's Katy Lofts, which is, as you saw, the only site that was awarded tax credits in Region 7 this year. It's very close to here. I'll show you on a map. But it is planned to be 100 units of permanent supportive housing. These are all studio units for individuals who are exiting homelessness or who are deeply low income. And I haven't included rents on here because it is expected that most of the residents in this kind of housing would have project-based vouchers, which would pay the difference between 30% of their income and the rent at the property. So it's not really relevant to have rents in this case. So this is where the site is. You can see Katy Lofts marked. It's just up I-35 from where we are now. It's in the Hancock neighborhood, which is just north of North University. It's right by that Hancock HEB and golf course, and about 3 blocks off of, I guess 1 block off of I-35. There's some commercial along I-35 here, and then there's a lot of single-family residential on the other side. This is 3 lots that all run vertically to 39th Street. So we started our public input process because the site scores really well from a location perspective. We get our state representative letter of support. We get a City of Austin resolution of support. The neighborhood is not registered with the Texas Secretary of State, so we go to our nonprofits and get letters of support from them. But we need a rezone because one of the 3 lots is zoned single family, which doesn't allow us to build the density that we're looking to build across all 3 lots. So we start our neighborhood outreach process. We have a lot of meetings with the neighborhood. And again, there's a core group of people who attend these meetings, who disseminate the information to the rest of the neighborhood, who we see over and over again. So what happened in this case is that Austin Justice Coalition got very involved, and specifically JP Connolly rallied a ton of people to write to council and to speak at Planning Commission in support of this project. This is the only project that I have worked on where there were people at Planning Commission, people at the table, part of the conversation, who were either potential future residents of the property or lived in affordable housing in a different part of Austin. And I think that made a huge difference to the conversation. Planning and zoning staff unanimously recommended for the rezoning of this project, and City Council unanimously approved the recommended rezone for this project. So Katy Lofts lives, and it's in pre-development, and we'll start construction on it next year. But I think that it's a useful case because of the different people who were brought into the conversation. I do think it made a huge difference to have Austin Justice Coalition so involved, but we don't have partners like that in other cities, and it was extremely rare for us to have that kind of nonprofit support come to bat for a developer in that way. I also think that if this had not been a case that got so much media attention and was such a clear-cut 100 units of permanent supportive housing for people exiting homelessness, if it was our normal mixed income project or if it were a market rate housing project, I don't know that it necessarily would have gone through quite as smoothly as it did. So I kind of want to end with a question for our ongoing conversation, which is, based on these cases and what you've seen, does it seem like TDHCA and the QAP offer true and representative public input opportunities, or perhaps are they just giving very small vocal groups of people a lot of opportunities to block affordable housing along its journey? So that is all I have, but I want to kind of talk more about that question and hear what you think. Thank you.